Good morning. I see you have recovered from the excesses of last night. That's good. Well, it's an immense pleasure to introduce to you my dear friend and admired colleague, Rosario Arias. As you might know, she is professor of English literature at the University of Malaga in Spain. She has published widely on Victorian and neo-Victorian fiction, contemporary Anglophone fiction, literary and critical theory, gender studies, and feminism, as well as the intersections between literature and other disciplines such as environmental humanities and health humanities. She has co-edited with Patricia Polham, Haunting and Spectrality in Neo-Victorian Fiction, published by Palgrave in 2010, with Patricia and Christine Ferguson and also Tatiana Conto, Spiritualism 1840-1930 in the Victorian Concepts series, published by Routledge in 2014. With Lynn Peterson, Reading the Trace in Modern and Contemporary Fiction, published by Gilfie in 2022. And in Spanish with Juan Jesús Zarovera, Spanish Spiritualist Writings and its Dissemination through Translations, published by Reichenberger in 2023. More recently, she has co-authored Women and Entertainment in the Victorian Home with Laura Monros Gaspar, also in Spanish, in Publicaciones Universitat Valencia, which is not Spanish, it is Valencian, in 2023. And she leads a competitive research group entitled Contemporary Literatures in the European Context. LitSky is the acronym. And she's the leader of the Literary Assemblage Research Project and forms part of the Erasmus Plus project Eco Stories, led by the University of Graz. Professor Arias is currently the president of the Spanish Association of Anglo-American Studies, which is a hard job, I tell you, I promise you. And she is also the president of Victorian and the Victorian and Neo-Victorian Society in Spain. She is also a co-opted member of the Academia Europea and a fellow of the English Association. And we know we only have 1 hour and a half, so I'll stop here. And I will just remind you that her lecture today, as you are already seeing, is called Relationality, Assemblage Thinking, and Communities of Care in Contemporary Fiction. Rosario, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here. You know you are most welcome.
Thank you, Susanna. Can you hear me? Is it clear? Thank you. Thank you, Susanna, for this very kind and generous introduction. It is a special event, so special for me for many reasons, and not least because Susanna examined me when I was a PhD student. I have to say that. So it's been recorded. She examined me many years ago, and lots of things have happened in between, and I consider you as well very dear and esteemed friend and colleague, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much, Silvia, Barbara, for the kind invitation. Thank you, organizing committee, for this amazing conference. So we were saying here over the break, you can feel the relationality in many ways, and this kind of circulation of energy and vibrancy that I mentioned later, precisely because you have contributed to this special feeling that we all have in this conference. So thank you to everyone involved, including the assistants and the team and Lola as well. So you will have to bear with me today. So because John and John have said about so high, I'll try to as well to do my best, but you will have to bear with me because I'm going to do theoretical framework first, and then I'm going to give you some case studies. But I promise you, I think it will be entertaining, sort of. So this talk examines the notion of radical interconnectedness or relationality alongside assemblage thinking. Because what I wanted to do is to see the connections we have in between our projects in between relationality and the assemblage thinking that we are working in this project that I lead alongside a team of wonderful friends and colleagues. I will employ a transhistorical and transnational technique to read contemporary texts paired with the defining features of communities of care, following the Natalia Schaffer, who has studied communities of care in the 19th century, proving that making connections across times and literatures offers a potential for transformation. So this is just a brief outline of what I'm going to take. The two texts I'm going to discuss briefly are those you have on the slide. I will address the need to offer alternative storytelling practices decentering the human and engaging with non-hierarchical approaches, given the current and future challenges in our entangled world through the trope of assemblage. I wish to share my thoughts in response to and dialogue with our globally linked and technologically mediated societies that are marked by established polarizations in terms of public opinion and access to socio-economic, technological, and environmental resources. So my aim is to develop a relational reading following Schaffer, as I value resonances, bringing together a wealth of sources, literary and non-literary, which stress interdependence and connection. So my focus will be on the communal, the assembled group. I believe that examining narratives for communal relationships can help literary criticism be part of a change in perspective, a move away from the individual onto the mutual needs and interdependence of all forms on earth. So as we have seen and will be seeing in many papers at this conference, relationality can be understood in many senses, since it represents this call for dialogue, fluid engagements and interaction, for example, between the human and the more than human, or between all types of matter, in a world that necessitates this breaking down of dualisms and binary oppositions. Relationality's current relevance owes much to the planetary turn. In 2015, Amy Arias and Christine Moraro hailed the planetary turn as a counterpart to the idea of the global, which had been understood as an economically, socially, and technologically homogenizing force, thus suggesting the notion, and you've got the quotations on the slides, a notion of relationality and return to ethics. They acknowledged that this move to Spivak's 1999 essay, The Imperative to Reimagine the Planet, and to Masao Miyoshi. Aligned with Emmanuel Levinas's ethics of alterity, Spivak posited that life on the planet must be lived as the call of a holy other. In turn, Miyoshi's article, Turn to the Planet, Literature, Diversity and Totality, discusses a conceptual change happening to the earth and globalism. And he argued that globalism was not adequate to encompass the conceptual change operating for all life forms, that is to say, the future of the global environment. Arias and Moraro and critics exploring planetary consciousness as a relational mode find cross-currents and crossovers in literatures of the past, as well as in those of the present, which is something I do today. I normally also do in my research. So relationality does away with binary oppositions and crucially involves responsibility, since, and you have the quotation there, since from a relational perspective, the external world is not an outside place, but an act of participation. Rather than placing the interest in atomized visions of the individual autonomous self, based on non-relationality and tied in with historical processes of colonialism, slavery, and genocide, separating people from territories, cultures, and communities, new approaches to subjectivity drawing on multidisciplinarity are network theories, and they are, it is written in bold, extended minds, social, environmental, ecological, self-organizing systems, and other transversal redefinitions of distributed agency predicated on process ontologies. So I'm going to move on to network theories. I'm taking the cue from them to try to narrow it down to the assemblage. Network theory, or the network term, capitalizes on the work of artist Mark Lombardi's 1996 drawing. And you have, it is that blurry because it was meant to be like this. BCCI, ICIC, and FAB. It was a series of 10 works, and the Whitney, which is stored in the Whitney collection, which shows web-like diagrams. And it wasn't a scandal because he was trying to suggest a collision between corporate and government bodies and the organized crime. So that was the kind of a drawing, the diagram showing those relationships. So the network term can be said to in a way to feed on this work, and the scientist Albert Laszlo Barabasi and Becca Albert, who argued in an article that a wide variety of seemingly heterogeneous networks, such as power grids, social networks, and the World Wide Web, exhibit nearly identical distributions of connectivity. So they shaped what has been called the network turn, comprising thoughts and practices around the turn of the new millennium. In the network turn, changing perspectives in the humanities, 2020, Ruth Ordert and other authors claim that network analysis does not pertain to the field of sciences only, but as they define it in the book, it is a set of practices and discourses that sit at the interface of the natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, computer science, and design. Networks are a category of study that cuts across traditional academic boundaries and that has the potential to unite diverse disciplines through a shared understanding of complexity in our world. So this involves characteristics such as dialogism, relationality, collaboration, co-creation. And one example is the series A Network Self, which grew upon the initial volume A Network Self, Identity, Community and Culture and Social Network Science, and comprises 5 volumes. As part of a network turn, the concept of assemblage has gained renewed attention in the last few years, which indicates that our current overlapping crises demand conceptualizations and notions to think relationally, underlying connectedness and co-functioning. I arrived at this concept after exploring the limited scope of the notion of orientation in a previous funded research project. So we saw that our orientation, which was the concept we explored in this project, wasn't good enough to try to give a sense, to give meaning to the overlapping crisis and the changing world. So we needed this more encompassing relational and dynamic notion to understand the rapidly changing world we live. Assemblage was loosely defined by Deleuze and Guattari in several of the writings, including Athas and Plateau's Capitalism as Schizophrenia, where they provided an anatomy of advanced capitalism as a schizophrenia and affirmed that literature is an assemblage. Let me say that this, you see this assemblage moving. I want to give a knowledge to my husband, who's an engineer, and prepare this for me. So this is kind of, you see the marriage of science and humanities there in motion. So as one critic has posited, the Athas and Plateau's is the exploration of assemblages or plateaus of intensities, self-vibrating entities, in which Deleuze and Guattari demonstrate how to create concepts in a way that does not presuppose a metaphysics of discontinuity. So assemblages possess tendencies to both stasis and change, as we'll see. The most often quoted definition is as follows, and you have it there. What is an assemblage? It is a multiplicity which is made up of many heterogeneous terms and which establishes liaisons, relations between them across ages, sexes, and reigns, different natures. Thus, the assemblage's only unity is that of a co-functioning. It is a symbiosis, a sympathy. They are not successions, lines of descent, but contagions, epidemics, the wind. The concept of assemblage escapes any fixed definition, as what characterizes the assemblage is a constant flux, an ongoing process of territorialization and deterritorialization with centripetal and centrifugal forces at work, in permanent change, assembling and disassembling. The assemblage involves various elements, bodies, parts, terms that have the capacity to function by means of cooperative and shifting relations in a constant transformative mode, thus both allowing for and respecting the heterogeneity of those elements. Brian Masumi's translation of Saxon Plateaus loses a bit of the connotations of, this is French, agencement, sorry about my pronunciation, as in French this implies agency for all entities, human, animals, things, and matter, holding the same ontological status. And this is extremely relevant for the way I tackle the notion of assemblage in this work. So even though no theory as such grows out of the Lösungstheorie, according to Martin Miller, another critic, assemblages have 5 constituent features. They are relational, productive, heterogeneous, they are desired, there's a force, there's a drive for a being to become multiplicity. They establish territories as they emerge and hold together, but also constantly mutate, transform, and break up. So another important characteristic of assemblage is multiplicity, understood as rhizomatic, which represents the backbone of these ideas in their work. The rhizome is constituted laterally, which itself assumes very different forms. You have the quotation from the Lösungstheorie's work. Multiplicities are rhizomatic, expose arborescent pseudo-multiplicities for what they are. There is no unity to serve as a pivot in the object, or to divide in the subject. A multiplicity has neither subject nor object. Also, it's important to note a time here for the assemblage is non-linear. There's a coexistence several temporalities in the assemblage, because one assemblage can lead to new assemblages for the future. Assemblage thinking has been adapted and reformulated by new materialism, such as in Jane Bennett's Vibrant Matter, where she discusses the agentic power of vital materiality, both human and more than human. And I'm using more than human and human depending on the author I'm drawing on, because they use it sometimes indistinguishably. She examines assemblages advocating for the vital materiality that flows through and around us. In so doing, Bennett calls our attention to the ethical dimension and responsibility of the human towards vibrant matter, like nature, and develops a theory of action and responsibility that crosses the human-non-human divide. Bennett's idea of vibrancy capitalizes on a view of the world which is interrelated and ethically interdependent, which has been crucial for my take on literature and assemblage as assemblage. Another new materialist, Karen Barra, takes Bennett's vibrant matter a step further and argues for an agential realism and interaction which applies to all types of matter, including human and non-human. Assemblage thinking finds alliances in the new materialist ways of considering the body as a network of entanglements and influx, thus enabling the transition of subjectivity from reality to virtual worlds or digital ecologies. Assemblage may look, perhaps to some, as a mechanistic way of looking into the world, but in fact, in having this ambivalent nature and being constantly transforming, morphing, it lends itself into new readings of non-hierarchical configurations of forces, flows, matter, and beings, facilitating the decentering of the human subject, who becomes another actor as part of the collective. There's an agency as well in the assemblage. Each member and proto-member of the assemblage has a certain vital force, according to Jane Bennett. There's also effectivity proper to the grouping as such, which is called an agency of the assemblage. So, furthermore, the concept of assemblage has been duly explored in posthumanist Catherine Helson thought through the idea of a cognitive assemblage, which is beyond my scope. I'm not going to deal with this today. Also has been mentioned and used by Rosi Braidotti when she affirms that one's life is at present a complex assemblage, as you have there. A complex assemblage of human and non-human, planetary and cosmic, even and manufactured, which requires major readjustment in our way of thinking. So she suggests new directions of work in the humanities based on the post-human condition, which draws on this complex interaction of the human with non-human agents. So as you see, assemblage thinking appears a transversal, relational set of ideas informing today's critical thinking. The Lösungstheorie's original discussion of assemblage was repurposed by other critics such as Bruno Latour, who also used the image of the network in his first formulation of the concept actor network theory. and the notion of the actant influencing Benes-Vibrant matter, and Bruno Latour also published After Lockdown and Metamorphosis in 2021, which is very interesting as well, but I'm going to deal with his work. So we see how it has been revised and revived by Bruno Latour and Manuel de Landa, who applied assembly thinking to social studies to conceptualize the social. De Landa examined several networked communities as social assemblages in new philosophy of society, assembly theory, and social complexities. He scrutinized the intermediate levels between the micro and the macro social entities and claimed that assembly theory allowed for a more dynamic approach to the ontological status of those entities. So you've got the quotation there about the assemblages being wholes whose properties emerge from interactions between parts. That can be used as a model for those intermediate entities, interpersonal networks, for example. Urban studies have found assemblage thinking particularly productive, for example, literary geography developed by John Anderson, as well as higher education, archaeology, and visual arts. And there's a particular article by Emma Wade on the doctoral writing as an assemblage in space and time. So for those who are now writing the PhD thesis, you are co-constructing a thesis and an assemblage, and how time is time space is time spaces and timescapes are constantly reconfigured as you go through the process, the assemblage of PhD writing. So having been involved in setting up PhD programs and supervision, I find this the way of using assembly theory absolutely fascinating. But also for archaeology and visual arts. So when mentioning assemblage practice, 20th century visual and plastic arts immediately come to mind. Raoul Hasmand, Hannah Hart photomontages, Picasso, Dali, all of them creating three-dimensional artworks or assemblages. But I'd like and allow me to mention one Malagueño artist, José María Escalona, who was born in Malaga. He's lived in Canada as well. Now he's back in Malaga, and who collaborates with our project alongside a curator and another artist. That's contributing not only to knowledge transfer, but to intersecting artistic practice and academic research. So this is the exhibition he prepared for one seminar of the project. This is the three of us. A gran jardín, that's a big, the great garden. And this is part of the assemblage, human and non-human assemblage that we configured when we visited, and he was explaining the exhibition. We have also finished the first seminar on assemblage with creativity and gender with some artists. And we have, Jose Maria and I, we have given a joint session. And his three-dimensional assemblages demonstrate how he considers himself entangled in the world, where he dissolves borders and limits between the human and the non-human, creating non-hierarchical configurations, and how he sees his assemblage of human and the non-human. And this is not part of the exhibition, it was an earlier work of his, and it's been done in a domestic environment, which is a house. Currently, other artists like Sonia Boyce and Kana Walker use assemblage techniques to critically engage with the history of colonization and exploitation by assembling heterogeneous elements and materials that constitute a whole, though simultaneously preserving their autonomy. They engender diverse temporalities, contemporary rendering of the 19th century, revising the 19th century, and producing a multilinear narrative, opening up new ways of reading into these works of art through intersectional, Black and feminist approaches. Felipe Espinosa Garrido and Ana Cristina Mendez have delved into Sonia Boyce's New Victorian 6 Acts 2018, a 6-screen video and wallpaper installation as an example of museal hospitality. And they pose this question: how does it reconceptualize the host, the Victorian Art Gallery, as a new Victorian museum, an institutional space that self-consciously and reflexively engages with the gendered and racialized subtext of Victorian visual arts? And this is understood as well as kind of assemblage, reconfiguring the elements they use in Sonia Boyce's use in this installation, which is a collection of Manchester Art Gallery. At the American Cara Walker, archaeologist Yanis Hamilakis, whose work is really inspiring for literary and cultural analysis, significantly examines Walker's 2014 A Subtlety or the Marvelous Sugar Baby, which is an installation that was placed in Brooklyn. As a fit example of sensorial assemblage, more concretely, since this art piece taps into the notion of assemblage on different levels. On the sensorial and affective, the historical and the political, it is a statement about the histories of Western taste, it's about sugar, but their entanglement with the Caribbean plantations, with colonialism and slavery. So issues like sexuality, oppression, and race play a part in this art piece. For Hamilakis, the striking art piece showcases some fundamental properties of assemblages. So the assemblage would have enabled not only its assemblage itself, but also the assemblage would have enabled new assemblages to emerge through the memories of the audience visiting the installation, and their own background and the actual experience of the installation. So one might think, again, that the assemblage practice in the visual and plastic arts has nothing to do with assemblage thinking or assemblage as a trope that I have been delineated earlier on. And quite the contrary, in fact, and I'm following Bill Brown in his reassemblage theory practice mode, where he claims that there is then on the discursive plane an intimacy between the theory and practice of assemblage. So he finds a lineage in between the artistic practice and the conceptualization, to the extent that assemblage as a trope also match to assemblage practices in his view. And this way assemblage thinking has generated its own reassemblage. So if it's true that we live in the assemblage era, as he claims, and it's also true that not only artwork, but also cities, archaeological sites can be assemblages, arguably literature can be examined as an assemblage. And in fact, Deleuze and Guattari said that literature is an assemblage. Remember I mentioned that? And they discussed Kafka in these writings as assemblage. In similar terms, Brown underlines the novel as such exists in an assemblage mode. Drawing on these ideas, a project aims at examining Anglophone literature and art assemblage and sets out to consider a tentative typology of literary cultural assemblages, bearing in mind that this remains a very difficult task because it's practically impossible to impose a fixed category or to have a fixed category to text as assemblages, which are open to change, morph, and transform. So some categories under study are assemblages of memory or temporal assemblages, sensorial assemblages, or assemblages of health and special assemblages. So I'm going to focus here on novels where the non-human or more than human intersect with the human in a broad sense, whereby the assemblage mode mobilizes interaction and interrelationship between beings, objects, and matter in a non-hierarchical way. And this chimes in with preoccupations about more than human forms in the environment, with concern on the environmental humanities in the Anthropocene, and I'm using this term, the Anthropocene era, not others. The proliferation of contemporary fiction about climate change, climate crisis today seems to be a response to Amitav Ghosh's plea for fiction writers to tackle this topic. Not only within the scope of science fiction or non-fiction. In The Great Derangement, he claims that since childhood, and I'm quoting from Ghosh, became aware of the urgent proximity of non-human presences through instances of recognition that were forced upon me by my surroundings. He perceptively argues that the mismatch between the urgency of climate change and the scarcity of realist texts dealing with it arises out of a sort of resistance that climate change presents to what is regarded as serious fiction. In response to Ghosh's demand for more serious fiction, I picked up just two novels that can be analyzed through the lens of environmental humanities. Literature allows us to do the psychological work necessary to deal with climate change and offers us many ways and spaces in which how to consider climate change and how to address it. Elisha Fax, The Island of Missing Trees, published in 2021, and Janice Pariat's Everything the Light Touches, 2022, to varying degrees, are environmentally concerned, where they take care for the biosphere. And in fact, more strictly to the point I'm trying to make, these novels assemblages, demonstrate that care is relational, is to be activated or to be enacted upon all forms of life on Earth through interlocked citizens and communities. Alicia Fax's The Island of Missing Trees is the author's 13th novel, and she's published recently the Revision Sky 2024, and I see a whole panel, 6 p.m. today, on this novel. Shafak is a British-Turkish novelist and storyteller who has published 21 books, many of which have been translated into several languages and awarded many prizes. She advocates for women's rights and LGBTQ+ rights, as well as freedom of speech. The Island Missing Trees is structured as an illustrated guide about the processes and parts of the tree and difficulty contents, how to bury a tree, roots, trunk, branches, ecosystem, how to unbury a tree, and follows the story of botanist Kostas and Daphne Kazantzakis, excuse me again my pronunciation, young lovers in a painfully divided post-colonial Cyprus, one Greek and Christian, the other Turkish and Muslim, and the price they continue to pay after moving to England, embodied in the 16-year-old daughter, Ada, who suffers from symptoms of intergenerational trauma caused by war. Her unresolved trauma is brought up to the surface after her mother's death, whose mourning becomes public when there's a video of her pain that she finally expresses. She's acting out, and in class she does something very distressing, and and that action is recorded short in class, and this goes viral on social media. Ada does not know her Cypriot family and has been brought up without any knowledge of or bonding with her maternal legacy. The arrival of her aunt Miriam will set this right and unveil the truth. 1974 Cyprus represents a second story where the lovers meet at the Happy Fig Tavern. This is a tavern, Happy Fig, by Ramba Arias, whose non-heteronormative relationship will suffer from marginalization and pain, eventually death. Another example of violence untethered in the island. There's a fig tree in the middle of a tavern, and there's a parrot, Chico. The fig tree, Ficus carica, constitutes the third narrative, which grows out of a sapling plucked by Kostas and replanted in the English backyard, growing up in parallel to Ada. So we've got the voice of the tree, the voice of the fig tree. The novel shows an assemblage mode of existence in which a human and the non-human, the fig tree, intersect and interrelate through memory, connection, emphasizing survival, hope, and resistance in the utter face of violence and forced mobility and displacement. The novel moves back and forth in time and place in the process of territorialization and deterritorialization, as is split into three narratives: late 2010s London, 1974 Cyprus, and the fig tree's time, which functions differently and relationally. This novel has already attracted significant critical attention, not least for the extraordinary tree narrator, whose voice becomes witness to the personal love story between Daphne and Kostas, as well as to the violence caused by war and displacements and the impact on the human and the more than human alike. Even though the end of the novels might be controversial to those who think that the complexity of the novel becomes undermined by animism or anthropomorphism, and this is debatable, I argue that the novel hinges on the decentering of the human, not giving predominance to either the human or the more than human, privileging interrelation and connection. In 10 Chinese periods, Everything the Light Touches was published in 2023. It is her fourth book. She's a writer and poet based between Delhi and Shillong. Again, sorry about the pronunciation. My apologies. And Shillong, the capital of Meghalaya, a state in northeast India. She's an assistant professor at Ashoka University, and she teaches creative writing and history of art. This novel also shows an assemblage mode of existence, already in the structure of the novel. It is a multi-layered saga, which crosses continents and centuries, which brings together 4 plot lines, which are placed and structured in an alternate way, in a non-hierarchical way, lending as well to the kind of relational reading that I'm promoting here. Again, the digital world plays an important part in the plot lines and you have the 4 protagonists: Shai, who visits her hometown, in contemporary times, who changes dramatically through care and connection with the environment. And this is narrated alongside indigenous land rights movements in present-day India. Evelyn Ivy, a late Victorian early Dorian botanist, a student from Cambridge, who searches for adventure and ends up in the forests of Lower Himalayas. Johan Goethe, who travels to Italy, and this takes him to develop a fully fledged theory about the vegetal world. And the young Swedish scientist, Carl Linnaeus, who travels on an expedition which will change his life and the history of botany forever. As one critic mentions in review of the novel, their stories are tangled together like roots through the ways in which they encounter the natural world around them. Structurally speaking, the different stories encompass heterogeneous, autonomous elements which constitute the whole as an assemblage. Interspersed with the stories are letters and archives, diary entries, and drawings, thus offering a post-colonial perspective for interrelated questions of discovery, botany, and the human versus the non-human. Both novels' assemblages underpin the idea that care is relational. It is to be enacted upon all forms of life on Earth through interlocked systems and communities. They illustrate the mutual accounts of life in an assemblage mode and within communities of care. Ultimately, these novels exhibit relationality, both for showing this assemblage mode, but also enacting care, which is relational. So I'm not going to stop here in discussing ethics of care. Just very briefly, giving a few ideas, I'd like to stop in the notion of communities of care that I'm employing in the talk. We have to remember that Carl Gilligan's different voice used the expression ethics of care, that she was deeply influenced by Nancy Chodorow's Sovereign Relationship, a Winnicott's Object Relation Theory, and that she expounded her ideas in response to Lawrence Kohlberg. Susanna Onega and Jean-Michel Ganteau find convergences and divergences between Gilligan and Emmanuel Levinas's ethics of authority, and one of the notable differences lies, and I quote, in the modality of founding responsibility for the other that contrasts Levinas's abstraction with Gilligan's concreteness, end of quote. Ethics of care have significant implications for several disciplines and have decisively impacted many areas. One of those is machine translation. And I'm very, very grateful to Professor Isabel Alves, I don't know if you're here, the president of this Portuguese Association for Anglo-American Studies, because I was there when Dr. Esther Monzó Nebot gave a keynote on this, precisely on this, just a few weeks ago. In her keynote, she laid bare gender and translation-specific stereotypes in machine translation as an activity and as a profession, and this has so important implications today for machine translation and artificial intelligence. She has drawn on Gilligan's ethics of care for her argument. She has recently credited in 2025 the social impact of automating translation and ethics of care perspective on machine translation with intended as a fusta, where she explores biases and formulates a state of affairs in machine translation as a question of voice, where those who participate in its development may be silencing, even inadvertently, the plurality of voices who risk being excluded from the share in the benefits derived from the processes and outcomes of automated translation. So you know that our voices are being left out in machine translation and artificial intelligence. Practices and principles of care have been carried out by followers, Gilligan and other critics, John Tronto, Robert Goodin, Virginia Held, Kitay, Maria Puig Vila-Casa. So this is not a place to fully engage in the various definitions, developments, and conversations among ethics of care in disciplines. Suffice to say, theoretical discussions of care coexist with specific contributions and practices with manifold implications. So a wording definition for me today could be that care is what happens when we try to meet another's needs, be that human or non-human. Many drawing on John Tronto's notion of seeking to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web and Donna Haraway's relational ontology, Maria Puig Vila-Casa clearly affirms that not only relations involve care, care is relational per se. Caring and relating share ontological resonance. And so she focuses on care, emphasizing interconnection and interdependency. as the ontological state in which humans encounter other beings and unavoidably live. So she impinges on the ambivalence of the dimensions of care, affective, practical, ethical, political, complicating the perceptions of care, etc. So trying not to flooding out the disruptive potential. And she considers that the meanings of care in between the human and the non-human worlds is a mostly uncharted territory. And she mentions in technoscience and nature cultures coming from Harvard. And she precisely mentions this, drawing on the notion of assemblage. So in the last chapter of her book, Matters of Care, Puccia de la Casa examines human-soil relationships between temporalities of care and sees the need to align and pace ecological relations with soils, away from accelerated responses that derive from techno-scientific innovations, emphasizing the affectivity and ethicality in life-sustaining doings in all spheres of life. And I'm quoting from La Casa, temporal imaginings that make time for care time contribute to enact a multiplicity of interdependent temporalities. And I know that time is being mentioning in several of our sessions before. So a multiplicity interdependent temporality is fostering alternatives that challenge the predominance of anti-ecological timescapes. So the necessary interdependent temporalities of beings and things lie at the heart of both novels under study, being time one of the characteristics of communities of care or long-term caring relationships. Care understood here as an action and not a feeling. And now I'm focusing now on the communities of care that have been proposed by Talia Schaffer, The Social Ethics of Victorian Fiction, published in 2021, where she addresses 19th century examples of communal structures through case studies in Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Charlotte Bronte, among other writers, but she capitalizes on the pressing need for ethics of care to be implemented in our 21st century lives. She vindicates, and I'm quoting, an ethics of care as an immediate, pragmatic, urgently necessary practice in literary criticism, in teaching, in academia, and the social world in which we live. Taking Schaffer's definition, defining features of a care community as a point of departure, so I'll briefly consider the two novels, Island of Missing Trees and Everything the Light Touches, novels assemblages, as portraying interlocked systems of care, including more than human forms. Schaffer supports the idea that care communities are fluid groups, including non-human forms. Obviously, they don't have to have a biogenetic affiliation at all. And although she does not develop this idea of the non-human forms in full, she breaks the ground for others to follow. For example, William Gohen, who has deployed a fascinating analysis on tactile ecology and the broad realities of Thomas Hardy's The Woodlanders, referring to the care of the earth in the context of arboreal ecology. So, notwithstanding this, Schaffer considers that we can develop an ethics of the relation with the inanimate. Our enjoyment of non-human care imposes a certain responsibility on us to maintain them. And here she aligns with Maria Puccia La Casa's conceptualizations of care, so that we have the connection here. So Schaffer develops a set of criteria for setting assembling arrangements to become caring communities. They are relational structures that require dialogue and respect for others. So it's important because care happens when somebody listens to you. That's how she defines the community of care. Dialogue and respect for others, acknowledging others, helping others, respecting others. And sometimes only the attempt to care would be enough for a community to sustain one another. Care communities have 5 major qualities. They must be affiliative, egalitarian, performative, discursive, and temporally skewed. But not all of them appear the same degree to care communities, and I don't want to give a totalizing kind of idea. We have these defining features, but to varying degrees. Care is performative, since repeating acts of caregiving produces a feeling of caring. Time is skewed, as it is non-linear, which shows alliances with queer temporality as fluctuating network. When care relationship becomes extended to a community, other factors are at stake: discourse, egalitarianism and voluntary affiliation. That this cause is the most crucial of the three, which means that some sort of communication must establish even through the nonverbal. According to Schaff, egalitarianism is the most problematic since it rarely works perfectly in practice, and affiliation involves joining a care community voluntarily. She offers several case studies, including a study of Victorian validism, Charles Dickens' A Great Christmas Carol, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Villette, George Eliot's novels, etc. Her discussion is rooted in the communal practices of care in the 19th century, but notably, these forms of care, she also argues, can be located in other cultures as well. And she argues the long-standing practices of communal inclusivity practiced by indigenous people, the extended familial care expected in Asian and African cultures. The particular culture I study has affinities to many, many others engaged in this widespread practice across space and time. And she includes an epilogue in this book about academic communities of care and what our academic lives look like when we prioritize care, or what she calls critical care, that I fully endorse. So going back to the novels, Shafak's The Island of Missing Trees proves how the novel progresses from non-relationality to relationality through the setting up of specific caring assembling arrangements trying to meet another's needs. Even though the logic of non-relationality is especially remarkable in 1974 story when Costas and Daphne have the clandestine meetings in the tavern, as well as in the years that pass between the 1970s and the next meeting in the early 2000s, the novel shows how relationality works when care arrangements are firmly established. There's one example in the non-heteronormative couple of Yorgos and Yusuf, how they care for one another, for Costas and Daphne, as well as for the fig tree and Chico the parrot, at the risk of being arrested for their romantic attachment. This assemblage of heterogeneous elements come together as a whole in a happy fig, displaying circulation of intensities as an assemblage, as well as features of community of care. But even when the assembled structure becomes deterritorialized, displaced, the effects will live on through the sapling plucked by Costas and replanted in their garden. The fig tree grows in parallel to Ada, and both carry a wound, a transgenerational trauma. This quotation book, family traumas are like a fig, translucent resin dripping from a cut in the bark. They trickle down generations. In both the fig tree and Ada, we see the struggles of rootlessness, and we have the epigraph. The novel opens the novel to immigrants and exiles everywhere. They're rooted, they're rerouted, they're rootless, and to the trees we left behind, rooted in our memories. And in fact, the tree says, "I am an immigrant plant." So we see in both the fig tree and Ada these struggles of rootlessness, displacement, and a fragmented sense of identity. And Marian's visit will heal Ada's wounds and will reconcile her with her maternal legacy when she carries out a series of performative caring duties, including telling stories and cooking Turkish recipes for the niece. Marian brings to her an important object, Daphne's most treasured possession, which is the music box, and which is a marker of memory and starting point for Ada to come to terms with her past. So the object represents this intergenerational transference of personal and collective memories. And in so doing, Ada and her grieving father manage to bridge an insurmountable gap between them at the end of the novel, when Ada is able to appreciate the fig tree entirely. Invisible as it was, she knew the fig tree was there, biding his time, growing, changing, remembering, trunk and branches and roots all together. Costas the botanist shows caring duties towards both the fig tree and his daughter, although he's grieving, unable to cope with the loss of Daphne. He says a community for care in this respect, preserving trees and in particular the fig tree. And the tree says, "He cared about me, always had, in the past, whenever the weather turned frigid, he took precautions to keep me alive." The beginning of the novel is taken up with Costas protecting the fig tree from cold temperatures by burying her. In turn, the fig tree narrator protects the entities that live in her, thus generating care. But also plant intelligence allows the vegetal world to send signals through the network of lattice fungi, were buried in the soil. The wood wide web to neighboring trees about dangers ahead. The tree narrator has been particularly praised by reviewers. When Shafak goes deeper into the diasporial life, a tree's voice is a delight. Caring structures like those I've just mentioned require disarray, disjointed time perceptions. In fact, the novel shows a fluid, temporally askew model of interrelations as regards time. Human time is linear. Arboreal time is cyclical, recurrent, perennial. Arboreal time is equivalent to story time. They're incompatible, human time and tree time. So however true this statement is, but the novel also problematizes this incompatibility of times, emphasizes that it is possible to find a way for humans and not more than humans to coexist and to cooperate. Events develop and unfold in a non-linear way, moving back and forth between locations, spaces, and times, which suggests three rings. The six-part division that I mentioned of the structure are broken by illustrations of trees, which function as arboreal punctuation marks, inscribing tree life into the novel's materiality, according to O'Neill. By interpreting the novel through interconnection circles, Shafak's novel highlights the urgency on non-anthropocentric modes of storytelling. The emphasis on the relational ontology between more than human beings showcases the need for an ethical engagement and care for the earth. The novel shows the transformative potential literature to decenter the human, disrupt traditional hierarchies of human vegetal being, and pave the way for relational caring engagement in all forms. So clearly the novel integrates intertextual references as well to arboreal and plant epistemologies, which resonates with the work being done by plant critical studies. And you've got just three examples. I'm just finishing reading Planta Sapiens, Paco Calvo. I don't know if you are familiar with this text, which is absolutely fantastic in his philosophy of science at the University of Murcia. Early on in the novel, Costas explains his take on plant intelligence of talking trees, which just beginning, he says, to discover the language of trees, to Ada, who is skeptical about it. In similar terms, in Arias' novel, we find this. Shai's father, who is a conservationist and activist, exhibits his knowledge of plant intelligence by referring to the root wide web. Beneath our feet exists another world, I learn, a network of infinite biological pathways through which trees share resources, information, nutrients. Some people believe trees care for one another. Arias' novel builds on the notion of relationality and interconnection in the four stories of travelers, which do not intertwine but are related like tangled roots, like a tangled bank, and Darwin's, how he finished his book. Through this structure, hierarchies are disrupted, binaries are suppressed, and emphasizing both our individual and interconnected existence. This novel assemblage works corporately as a human and then more than human co-create meaning in a constant dynamic of deterritorialization and re-territorialization, coming and going back and forth, both in terms of space and time, providing this transnational, transhistorical, multilinear narrative. The first story is portrays Shai's story, Blackham, Shillong, where she perceives the tension of non-relational ways of being, knowing, and making. She decides to visit her nanny, who is ill and lives in Mobalang and the age of Meghalaya, a place where Iranian extractivism is damaging the environment, and the indigenous community fights against mining while keeping the communal caring practices. Without our land, we are lost. Land is relevant, but so is storytelling. The non-Nya Kanya, is a bearer of the word who tells sacred stories, a crucial activity, since shared stories and narratives are part of the process of group boundary reconstruction and following Manuel de Landa, who was applying assembly theory. So this way, Shai builds up interpersonal links with the community thanks to the communal experience of storytelling through the fables and traditions that sustain the locals, and becomes an element of the community as assemblage. This is most noticeable when she's adjusting herself to family rhythm, taking care of her nanny. Talia Schaffer mentioned long-standing practices of communal inclusivity in indigenous cultures to show some affinities to her concept of communities of care. Her stay in Momalang, living with the family, not her family, and the nanny's family, provides a model of caring practices which substantially changes Shai, especially because of her performing duties, attending both her nanny and the vegetable garden. And you have here, and I've just highlighted what she says. I've realized it is merely to sleep well at night to wake unknown. You are needed by someone, a plant, a pet, a person, the world yourself. This action of being needed is at the heart of caring communities, and Shai develops this understanding which provides the key to this complex novel. It is an understanding aligned with a different way of being in the world, carrying a strong motive of connecting with a larger world through movement and travel, through our relationship with our planet. The second story revolves about Evelyn, the Cambridge student of science in late 19th century, early 20th century England, who is perfectly aware of obstacles women have to face when studying science. Her passion for botany is traced back to her relationship with her grandmother Grace, who established a caring community performing care duties to her and to her garden. Attending to both the needs and the dissertation, getting to know plants intimately, it was a deep knowing, one gained from touching the earth every day, being in touch, and attuning herself to the lives of growing things. It was intuition, clear, precise, and hard-won too. Evie represents a way of looking at the world, away from labeling, categorizing, compartmentalizing. She becomes familiar with Goethe's radical botanical writings and wishes to find a special tree that is to be found in the forests of lower Himalayas. The novel features nomadic communities and the fictional place in that fictional Himalayas who only own what they can carry and provide a fit example of indigenous care. And the third story, which is precisely Goethe, serves as a companion piece where he travels to Italy in 1787, and during his stay and after observing nature for a long time, he develops his botanical theories, which were published in his Metamorphoses of Plants, say 1790, centered on an archetypal plant. In his quest, Goethe acknowledges that we have to think like a plant, and I quote, "We learn from the plants a way of living thinking." This way, he proposes a mode of perception which will draw on instinct, imagination, inspiration, that's quotation from the novel. And interestingly, an interlocked structure of care is also established in this as part of the novel through a community of artists. When he says goodbye to one of those artists, Johannes states, "I will be back like a plant, in going I return." So this story is set in contrast with the one that narrates Swedish botanist Carl Linné's expedition to Lapland, whose notes were later published in Flora Lapponica. You know that the botanist who established the way of cataloguing plants in a binary way. According to one reviewer, this is a narrative where the desires of the other three converge, finding solace in one's roots, undertaking a journey to new lands in pursuit of scientific knowledge, and striking the right balance between philosophy and modern science for a fuller understanding of our existence. This part of the novel is written, and the author has given interviews, and she said that she's written in Irish poetry, a lyric narrative that takes the journal entries of Linné's, and she writes poetry on the basis of that entries. And in a way, those entries is ghostly because they are there and not they are present and absent, palimpsest like a bit. The four stories produce an assemblage consisting of multiple various parts linked together to form a whole. Assemblages are relational, productive, heterogeneous. They show the dynamics of centrifugal and centripetal forces, territories that mutate and transform in permanent change. In fact, there is important the circulation of energy, desire, and intensities in territories in those assemblages. And these stories, in fact, although they are not intertwined, have ecology with history, place and time, but also we find a kind of connection, a vibrancy, a circulation of intensity in between the four plot lines. So, although they not intersect, this kind of vibrancy, this connection underlying the four stories in which we find the human, the more than human actors as vital agencies and not as separate but connected with one another. So the novel does not portray the more than human voice as we found in Ellen Shafak's novel. claiming for their own rights, but likewise integrates alternative structures as a way of looking at nature, life, the planet from a relational position, mobilizing change and social responsibility in a variety of ways. And now to conclude, the interlocked systems of care that I mentioned earlier that have some defining features following Talia Schaffer invite us to consider, to suggest a relational reading of these novels, a non-hierarchical analysis of the various living forms, places and ideas. These multiple parts are linked together to form a whole in constant change, thus constituting assemblages underlying systems of care between entities, including the more than human. So I hope I have demonstrated that it is possible. Assemblage thinking is a valid trope to analyze and see and read cultural works and literature and the world, in fact. They have proved that it is possible to undertake this kind of historical and transnational reading of these texts as assemblages paired with the notion of communities of care, proving that literature offers a potential for transformation and showing the inextricable mutual interdependence of all beings and things. And I'm following Skoba, Stowell, and Sharma. Both novels' assemblages evidence that care is relational, and they illustrate that literary assemblages contributes to reflecting, projecting, and shaping the substrate for the coexistence of all beings and things to be possible through interlocked ecologies of care. Reading this way, reading for care, can help literary criticism, and I quote, participate in a global recentering of care that is also occurring in sociology, economics, philosophy, and political science. Enshrining relationality as the basis of civic society can also help us survive, particularly, as she was saying, for those who live on the margins. If we deeply believe in these, would it be possible for us to promote connection and relationality in our everyday lives, across literatures, across periods? Can we aim for connectivity rather than disruption, for fruitful juxtaposition rather than sallowing eras? That's wishful thinking, perhaps? I don't know. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Do you think our conference would be an example of relationality?
And assemblage. Assemblages are relational. So where we move, at this place, we are territorialized and deterritorialized. We move, we transform, we change as we speak. We come from our places and we are constantly co-creating meaning, but also being different, heterogeneous, at the same time co-living in the same space. So obviously
unpredictable also. But you know, networking was a word that we used for conferences before, was a different meaning.
Yes.
So you have made us rethink the whole thing.
And this takes me to Talia Schaffer's last chapter, because obviously she's not naive in using communities of care in the 19th century. She finds the crevices and the gaps and the silences. It's not that easy as just to portray, caring duties, a woman carrying a man, or the daughter caring for the father. She finds other instances, and she complicates matters, but also she projects this into the contemporary 21st century academia, and I think that's a chapter we should all read. How to make this part of the daily practice in the classroom as well, in departmental meetings, etc. So, I think that's highly recommended.
Now, I'm sure there are many questions by experts in everything. Oh, claro. Claro que sí. Claro que sí. Sí, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosario. Thank you very much for your lecture. I found it very intriguing that both novels mention the concept of the Wood Wide Web, which was, I think, coined by Peter Wallenberg in his The Hidden Life of Trees, I think the book is entitled. And there is a chapter in the book that studies how solitary trees manage to grow taller because they do not have to compete for resources, either water or light, but they die younger because they lack this network of care and connection. And I would like you to elaborate on this idea.
Yes, thank you, Barbara, for this. I just was trying to find the image. Yes, I'm not expert, obviously, in arboralities. We are not, but as we are reading, I'm really interested in reading the way plants are intelligent in a different way, and because I'm reading this scientist, Paco Calvo, I feel safer saying this because he's constantly giving you the examples of that, about the connections and about there's, in fact, he argues that we should try to see trees upside down, that the more important part is happening in the soil, it's happening underground. Yes, is this the kind of information they send out from the tree goes through the tangled roots and everything that's happening underground, which was obviously makes research very difficult because how can you possibly research when things are happening in subterranean way? Yeah, but as a concept, it's been developed in different contemporary novels. I haven't mentioned obviously about Richard Powers' of a story, and I have just also finished another novel, Canadian novel, which I think is also fascinating in this respect, which is Wormwood. So I think this is because of achievements and the different scientific research is being conducted. In a way, literature, culture is also responding and trying to give it a take on what's been done in plant critical studies in plant intelligence, including trees, of course.
At least one over there.
Hi, thank you so much for your great talk. So I have a question regarding the term assemblage and entanglement, especially entanglement, how it's used by Karen Barad. And so I was wondering how you use these terms in your work. So do you use them interchangeably? Do you see entanglement as a part of assemblage or the other way around? What's the difference, or what do they have in common? Maybe you can expand on that.
Thank you. Assemblages are relational, and also they are desired, and they have affect as well, and there's an energy that makes them change. So taking this idea as a starting point, Jane Bennett and Karen Barad talk about what's happening, the energy and the interaction that happens in between forms and elements. So not interchangeably, but because the lesson category was writing for them, they use this idea of the desire affect that makes a being or makes a form become something else and attract one another. And that's the idea of what's happening between, which is in another phenomenology would be the flesh, for example, is what they say in Jane Bennett's Vibrancy and Karen Barad's, also drawing on many sources. I don't want to give impression that I'm using them interchangeably, but that might be my take. This idea of desires, affect, assemblages are desired and affect, and how this idea is taken by both Jane Bennett's Fire and Matter and Karen Barad's in a different way. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. But perhaps not, they can't hear you at the back.
Yeah, this is working, yeah. I have a comment and a question. The comment is about the cartoon that we're seeing there as an example of entanglements. And I feel that the street lamps are missing the wires that should be underneath as well, maybe mixing with the roots. Yeah. Because entanglement goes beyond nature. It also affects technology, machines, animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are some things missing there to get the full picture, probably. And my question is whether you think there is a narratology of the assemblage, if there are certain techniques that authors use in their books. Because as I was listening to you, I'm not familiar with the book, so that's why I'm asking. But I had the feeling that they were using similar techniques in the sense that there are like non-linearity, different voices, temporalities that are mixing up somehow. So would you say that there is a trend to represent in literature the entanglements in this sense, in this way, through a specific narratology, maybe?
Thank you so much for your comment and question. About the comment on the drawing, I have a credit there. So yeah, there's something missing because we live in the assemblage era. That's what Bill Brown said. Bill Brown has thing theory, and he moved from thing theory to assemblage and reassemblage. But it's true that the other non-human elements are missing there. But it was just to explain not really entanglement, but the Wood Wide Web. That's why, and that was the diagram from this article. I've got the credit there. But and to your question, I think that you're right. There are some defining features because there's no fixed definition at all. It seems that some ideas, some elements keep coming up in a different reinterpretation that they've been taken as possibly defining features, but and they are being used repeatedly in the interpretation of literature. I have to say that it's being used a lot now in literary geography and in a Routledge Handbook Companion to Literary Geography. There's a chapter by John Anderson on literary assemblages in geography, and there's not much as yet a lot about literature and culture as assemblages. So, but yes, it's also what we're trying to argue in the project and try to find several different types or categories, although we find as well in one single piece many types of assemblages. You can't say it's one unified fixed category. Thank you.
Can I ask something? Because, of course, the question of the narratology takes me to there is a parallelism between critical models and scientific models. And, of course, until very recently, we were just talking about the new physics, no? The new physics. Does this have to do with a movement beyond the new physics? Because if you think of Janet Winterson, for example, no, you have those entanglements, but sometimes they are parallel. Or David Mitchell, you have those sort of lives moving in parallel, and it's all new physics. But I don't know if the sciences are moving beyond the new physics to something more entangled.
Mathematical models for sure.
That one, yeah. That one, but what's the difference between this and the new network and the models of the new physics?
I think it's moving beyond blocks and into more entangled.
But you know, in the new physics, you can change courses, you know, and also serendipity takes a lot of importance.
And literature is also reproducing and repeating the same models.
For me, it's a formalism. Okay. But it's true that the green world, you know, the natural world is important.
It is masked into the into our studies. We cannot just avoid.
Yes, but it happens in architecture. It happened with postmodernism that all of a sudden the skyscrapers were being built in a different way. You know.
Yeah.
It's beyond.
It's beyond. It's encompassing and it's crossing disciplines.
Yeah, exactly.
It's multidisciplinarity and also crisscrossing fields.
Yes. Yes. More questions?
Time. Yeah.
Yeah. Questions?
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very rich lecture. I was wondering if we could go back to the quote you have by Talia Schaffer and the challenge to on communities of care, and care as an immediate, pragmatic, urgently necessary practice in literary criticism, teaching, academia, and the social world of which we're part.
Sorry,
and how you would, if you would like to elaborate a little bit further, also bearing in mind your conclusions, how you see that happening within literary criticism and teaching in a way that resonates with the social world.
Thank you for your wonderful question. She gives some examples in class, for example, teaching. You can working with groups, creating their own assemblages and communities of care in between, but also at the same time, you're part of the group, and also you have authority as a teacher. So she gives examples. She gives examples as well how to promote and help junior members of the department, creating communities of care. And this is something that personally I take as very seriously, promoting and supporting listening. I think what is, if we think that care is basically the listening to the other, I endorse and I fully endorse, and I really believe that this is how we should do, listening what the text has to say, listening what the other voices have to say, listening to the junior members, the senior members. That's the listening to other people's voices. That's, I would just summarize what care practices for me would be that.
Okay, if you have a very brief last question,
Yeah,
otherwise,
yeah, okay.
Last question, and we move to the
next section.
To the next session.
Yes, there's another question there.
No, go ahead with that one. Yeah.
Yes, I'll try to go to both.
Hi, I'm not sure. I'll try to make it brief. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I had lots of images and context to my mind. Your exhibition brought to my mind an exhibition that we have at the Museum of the Acropolis at the moment. And also, I've been working with photo novels, and I've been thinking about different kinds of things. My question, to make it brief, do you think that while thinking about assemblages and their dynamics, the context in which they appear, for example, literature or the museum, is that important?
Yeah, absolutely. Assemblages are political as well, the deliberate arrangement. And Yanis Hamilakis, the archaeologist, also, he reads texts very well, art pieces. He argues for that, and it has some implications for biopolitics as well. So definitely, yes, absolutely political. Thank you.
Lola, you want to say something?
Because you have your paper is on,
yes.
No.
That's the thing. I mean, it's funny. I'm going to talk on the same novel, Everything the Light Touches. I simply wanted to know whether you think, the relevance of light in the novel. Everything the light touches.
Yes.
I mean, light plays, I think, a very, very important role in it.
Yeah.
And what do you think about it? That's my question.
To keep it brief, light as knowledge, and that's trying to find different types of knowledge, different modes, how to relate to knowledge. So that's for me, to keep it very brief. Thank you. Looking forward to your paper.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody.